Have you ever built your whole life around keeping people out just to survive? Imagine losing the two people you love most, your wife and child, in a single phone call, while you were smiling, giving a toast, thinking everything was fine. Imagine the silence that followed, not just around you, but inside you. Now, imagine years later, someone walks into your life not loud, not demanding, just quietly, seeing you, not the title, not the mask, but you. Would you let them in? Or would the fear of losing again be louder than the chance to feel anything at all? This is the story of Grant, a powerful CEO with a broken past, and Claire, the woman who never tried to rescue him, only stood close enough for him to stop hiding. It's not about grand gestures. It's about the quiet moments, the ones that heal, the ones that change everything. If you've ever been afraid to open up again, this story might be the mirror you didn't know you needed. Like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories to follow us into this journey of love, loss, trust, and the quiet bravery of choosing to feel again. Now, let the story begin. The morning sun was already high, slanting through the tall glass panels of Hartwell and Pierce's downtown headquarters. On the 32nd floor, the polished terrazzo floor gleamed like a frozen lake under soft golden light. Claire Whitmore stepped off the elevator with a tight grip on her worn leather briefcase and a knot in her stomach she hadn't been able to shake since waking up. It was her first day. She'd arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a navy sheath dress and low beige heels. But one wrong turn sent her through a hallway she didn't recognize. These offices were like a maze, elegant but disorienting, with abstract art and minimalist signage that looked like it belonged in a museum, not a workplace. Claire scanned the hall again, her throat dry. The pressure had been building since she left the elevator. Coffee hadn't helped. She needed to find a restroom. Fast. That's when she saw a door slightly ajar, marked only with a symbol that vaguely resembled a private lounge. No nameplate. No indication otherwise. But it was her best guess. She pushed the door open. Inside, the lighting was softer. Gentle instrumental music filtered from unseen speakers, and a light scent of eucalyptus drifted in the air. The walls were warm-toned wood, the floor a smooth stone tile, and a cluster of folded towels sat beside a marble basin. Claire blinked. This didn't look like a bathroom. She turned to leave, cheeks already flushing with embarrassment, just as the sound of running water ceased. A man stepped out from behind a corner partition. Tall, broad shoulders, a white towel wrapped around his waist. His hair was damp, darkened with water, and small beads still trailed down his chest. His eyes, a sharp steel gray, locked on hers. Claire froze. So did he. It only took a moment for her to recognize the man from company reports and finance magazines. Grant Hartwell, CEO, founder. The man behind the empire she now worked for. "This is a private executive spa," he said, voice low, calm, but unmistakably firm. Claire's mouth opened. No sound came out. Then, finally, I'm sorry. I was looking for the restroom. I'm new. I must have taken a wrong turn." He didn't move, just raised a single brow. "This floor isn't open to general staff. The employee restrooms are on the 28th. "Right. Yes. I'm so sorry. Mr. Hartwell, I'm Claire Whitmore. Today's my first day. I'm the new language consultant with Legal and Global Comms." She tried a smile that felt entirely wrong for the situation. Great first impression. I know. Something flickered behind his gaze. Recognition, maybe. Or amusement. He didn't smile. Though. You have orientation in 20 minutes, he said. I suggest you find your way. Yes, absolutely. Right away. Claire spun toward the door. Her heel snagged on the rug. She stumbled forward with a small gasp and instinctively reached out to steady herself, her hand landing squarely on his chest. Warm, solid, still damp. Their eyes met again. Closer this time. Claire could feel the heat rise behind her ears. I'm sorry. Again. This is not how I planned to start the week, she mumbled, pulling her hand back like she'd touched fire. He didn't flinch, just looked at her. Long enough that she wondered what he was thinking, then stepped aside. We'll discuss your navigation skills another time. Ms. Whitmore. Looking forward to it, she said under her breath, already halfway out the door. As she found her way to the right floor at last, Claire pressed a hand to her heart, willing it to slow down. What a way to begin. What a person to meet. And yet, something about that moment lingered. Not just the embarrassment, but the way he'd looked at her like someone caught off guard for the first time in a very long while. Neither of them knew it yet. But that wrong door had opened something far more complicated than a simple misunderstanding. It had opened a crack. The HR orientation was half over by the time Claire finally made it to the right conference room, cheeks still pink from the spa incident. She nodded through policy slides, filled out tax forms, and quietly drank the now cold coffee she'd picked up hours earlier. No one else seemed to notice her quiet embarrassment, or that her morning had begun with a very shirtless Grant Hartwell. That, at least, was a small mercy. Her desk was on the 30th floor, 2 below the executive suite, and she shared a corner pod with 2 others from the global communications team. The view overlooked the Hudson River, and the late morning light shimmered across the glass like scattered coins. New girl, huh? Her coworker Dan said as he passed by, nodding at the still half-packed box beside her. You're the language whiz. That's me, she replied, lifting a folder of German contract notes. Claire Whitmore. Dan whistled low. Heard about you. Fast track hire. Geneva, Munich, Tokyo impressive? Claire offered a modest smile. Paper looks better than real life sometimes. But the moment was cut short by the ping of an internal message flashing across her monitor. From G, Hartwell subject translation, trial attached, 4 multilingual contracts, note complete by 3:00 p.m. No errors. Claire blinked. It was 11:46 a.m. Each contract was dense, covering legal language in French, Mandarin, and a particularly thorny dialect of regional German. There were cultural nuances to unpack, idioms that didn't directly translate, and legal phrasing that needed precision. This wasn't a typical first assignment. She knew what this was. A test. But it wasn't a challenge she feared. Claire had cut her teeth managing global negotiations for NGOs in Europe. She'd once translated under pressure during a hostage mediation. She could handle Hartwell's cold push. What rattled her, if anything, was that she'd seen something just a flicker behind his unreadable exterior this morning. A breath of something softer. Not kindness, exactly, but something like confusion, almost like he hadn't expected to be seen. She put her head down and began to work. At 2:58 p.m., Claire stepped into the outer edge of the executive suite, holding a clean, clipped folder in her hands. A receptionist offered a glance half curiosity, half skepticism, but buzzed her in. Grant's office was understated but commanding dark oak paneling, shelves of trade law journals, a framed photograph of a sailboat cutting through fog. He sat behind a desk of black walnut, looking exactly like the man she'd seen in Forbes, except she now knew how he looked, with water trailing down his spine. He didn't look up as she approached. "You're early," he said. "I allowed time for review." He reached for the folder without another word, flipping through the pages in practiced silence. The air between them was quiet but heavy, like the stillness before a thunderstorm. Claire stood still, not out of fear, but out of patience, a kind of quiet knowing. She didn't need to fill the silence. She let it exist. After several long minutes, Grant set the folder down. "No significant errors," he said. Claire lifted a brow. "You sound disappointed." His gaze flicked upward, finally meeting hers. A long pause stretched between them. "You're not what I expected," he said flatly. "And you're exactly what I was warned about," she replied, not unkindly. One corner of his mouth just barely tugged upward, not quite a smile, but almost. Back at her desk, Dan peered over her monitor. "You look like someone who just survived a lion cage." "Something like that," Claire muttered. That evening, as the building emptied out and the skyline began to glow with the haze of dusk, Claire stayed behind. She rechecked her inbox. Nothing more from Grant. No notes. No corrections. But something told her this wasn't the end of their strange exchange. It felt more like the first move in a game of chess where no one says out loud that they're playing. That night, in her apartment overlooking Washington Square, Claire made tea and opened the worn journal she kept beside her bed. She didn't write about meetings or contracts or corporate maneuvering. She simply wrote, "He's not cold. He's careful. There's a difference. And I think I may be the first one to notice." For the next several days, Claire moved through the office like a steady current present, necessary, but mostly unnoticed. She learned the rhythms of the place who took early lunches, who hoarded printer paper, which elevators always skipped the 29th floor, for no reason anyone could explain. She paid attention, not because someone asked her to, but because that was how she had always survived new beginnings. Grant Hartwell, for his part, kept his distance, but not completely. He didn't speak to her directly again, not in words, but the tasks kept coming. Always last minute, always urgent, always complex. She translated a 300-page proposal overnight, rewrote investor notes from English to Mandarin in real time during a video call, took a late call from Zurich and summarized the key points in German before the 8 a.m. meeting. None of it was easy, but none of it broke her. One Thursday morning, Claire returned from a brief coffee run to find a small, yellow sticky note on her screen. No signature, just 5 words in firm black ink. You translated the subtext well. She stared at it for a moment, heart oddly full. Grant's way of complimenting, it seemed, was indirect, coded, even. But she understood what he meant. She always had a knack for hearing the things people didn't say out loud. The office had its own language, spoken in glances and door closings, and Claire noticed the shift before anyone else did. It was in the way people paused mid-sentence when she passed, the way Janice from legal always friendly before, now spoke with a hint of polite coolness. The way Grant's eyes lingered for a half-second longer than they should when he handed her documents and meetings. None of it was overt, but it didn't need to be. One evening, as she stood near the elevators with Dan, waiting for their rides down, he leaned toward her and said, "You do know everyone's talking, right?" Claire didn't look at him. "About what? About how you seem to be decoding the dragon," he said, meaning Grant. "I'm just doing my job." Dan gave her a sidelong look. "Sure, but the rest of us have been here for years and still don't get anything out of him beyond monosyllables and the occasional frown." Claire smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Maybe that's the problem," she said. "You're all trying to get something from him." Dan blinked. "And you're not. I'm just trying to listen." The silence between Claire and Grant, when it happened, didn't feel empty. It felt charged. There were days when he passed her in the hall and said nothing, but his eyes paused, like he was about to speak and thought better of it. Once, she saw him watching her through the glass of the conference room, arms folded as she navigated a tense call with an investor from Tokyo. He never interrupted, just observed. There was something careful about him, not calculating careful, like someone who had touched fire once and never fully healed. It made her ache in ways she couldn't explain. One Friday afternoon, Claire delivered a finalized merger translation to his office. She stood quietly as he scanned it, nodding occasionally. The sun angled low behind him, casting sharp golden lines across his desk. When he finished, he looked up and said, almost offhand, "You were in Geneva during the Kovacs acquisition?" She nodded, surprised. "Yes." "You read my file?" "I read everything," he replied. Another pause. "This time," she broke it, "I didn't expect that." "Why, because you look like someone who doesn't care what anyone else brings to the table." Something flickered in his expression, not offense, not quite amusement. Something else. "I care when it matters," he said. Claire studied him, then said softly, "Then I hope I continue to matter." She turned to leave. His voice stopped her. "You do." Just 2 words. But they landed like a stone in still water rippling outward. Impossible to take back. That night, Claire didn't sleep. She lay awake in her apartment, the city murmuring outside her window, and thought about the look in his eyes. Not romantic, not yet, but intimate in its own way. Vulnerable, as if he hadn't meant to say it out loud. And for the first time since arriving at Hartwell and Pierce, she allowed herself to admit something. She wanted to know what it would look like, what he would look like without the armor. And maybe, just maybe, she wanted to be the one to take it off. The annual Hartwell and Pierce Foundation Gala was a polished affair, white tablecloths, live string quartet, soft lighting, and the low hum of conversation seasoned with the clink of crystal glasses. The company transformed one of its towering New York floors into an event space every autumn, welcoming donors, board members, and select employees. Claire wasn't one for glittering parties, but her role as global comms meant she was needed to assist with international guests. She stood near the back of the room, a glass of sparkling water in hand, her midnight blue dress catching hints of light when she moved. From her vantage point, she could see Grant across the room. He looked different. Not relaxed exactly, but more human. His tuxedo fit with precise elegance, but his posture had attention to it, shoulders just a touch too square. His jaw locked in a way that suggested endurance rather than enjoyment. He moved from group to group, saying the right things with the practiced ease of someone who had done this 100 times. But Claire could tell he hated every second of it. She watched as a waiter offered him a glass of champagne. His hand twitched. He didn't take it. Instead, he offered a curt nod, turned away from the tray, and excused himself from the group he'd been speaking with. Claire hesitated only a moment before following him. She found him on the balcony, one hand braced against the railing, the other loosely clutching a water glass. The cool October air swept through his hair, lifting it slightly. From this angle, the Manhattan skyline stretched behind him like a sea of quiet fire. "You should be inside," he said without turning. "There might be guests who need translation." "They can wait," Claire replied gently. He glanced at her but said nothing. She moved to stand beside him, not close, not far, just beside. There was silence for a while, the kind that didn't feel awkward, just real. "Champagne," she said softly. "You don't drink it." His jaw tightened. He looked out at the lights. 5 years ago, there was another gala, just like this. My wife, Emily, was there. And my daughter, Nora. She was 7. She kept sneaking chocolates from the dessert tray. Claire stayed quiet. The wind stirred the hem of her dress, but she didn't move. We were celebrating a merger, one we thought was going to change everything. I was giving a toast when the call came in. His voice was flat, but she could hear the effort beneath it. There'd been an explosion at one of our research labs in Boston. They said it was an accident, then later sabotage, data theft gone wrong. The fire spread faster than it should have, faster than anyone expected. Claire closed her eyes, feeling the ache swell in her chest. Emily and Nora weren't supposed to be there, but they'd stop by to surprise me, bring me the pen I'd forgotten for the speech. They were in the lobby when it happened. He turned toward her, just slightly, and for the first time, she saw it in his face, the cracks. I was here, toasting, smiling, and they were. He didn't finish the sentence. Claire reached out without thinking, resting her hand on his. He didn't pull away. "You don't have to finish it," she said. "I heard enough." He stared at their joined hands, the strength in his body seeming to shiver beneath the weight of his grief. "That's why you don't trust people," she said quietly. "Why you keep your walls up so high." He didn't argue. My old partner was behind the merger. He'd been working with a competitor, sold access codes, rerouted security protocols. I trusted him. I thought he was a friend. I thought... Grant exhaled, a sharp, bitter breath. After that, I decided I couldn't afford trust. Not again. Claire didn't speak for a long time. And then, barely above a whisper, "But living without trust, without connection, that's not really living either, is it?" He looked at her, then really looked. Their eyes held, and for the first time, she felt something shift between them. Not romantic, not yet, but deeply human, shared. "You're different," he said after a while. She tilted her head. "Different? How? You don't try to fix it. You just stand there. Quiet. But I feel it." Claire gave him a small smile. "Sometimes," People don't need fixing. They just need someone who won't look away. When they returned inside separately, without a word, the atmosphere hadn't changed. Champagne still flowed. Laughter still echoed. But for Grant and Claire, something had realigned. Something had softened. Something had begun to heal. That night, Claire wrote a single line in her journal. There's pain in him so old, it's fossilized, but still, it breathes. Paris in early November carried a quiet chill, the kind that settled in your collarbones and lingered on the back of your neck. Claire had packed light 2 silk blouses, 1 gray cashmere scarf, and a soft trench coat that had seen better days, but still made her feel put together. 3 days. Just a routine series of contract reviews with French partners. Grant had said, nothing complicated. But from the moment their private jet touched down at Charles de Gaulle, the air between them had shifted. It wasn't anything said. It was the pauses that lasted a breath too long, the glances that held just a little too much weight. Whatever had happened on the balcony back in New York hadn't stayed behind. They were both too careful to name it. But it was there, undeniably. The meetings went smoothly. Claire's French was fluent, warm, and confident. She moved through negotiations with the ease of someone who understood not just language, but people. Grant, for once, didn't interrupt her. He just watched, closely. It was during a break in the second day that Thomas Lauren, one of the senior French partners, approached Claire in the hallway. His charm was effortless, if a little practiced, and his compliments were draped just barely in professionalism. Your phrasing was perfect, he said, standing too close. The way you softened the financial projection, it was intuitive. Claire smiled politely and stepped back half a foot. Thank you. I try to be mindful of tone. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Grant watching. His expression unreadable, but his jaw was clenched. Later that evening, as they rode the hotel elevator up to their rooms, Grant spoke first. Laurent seems quite taken with you. Claire glanced at him, amused. He's being typically French. All charm, no commitment. Grant's eyes flicked to hers, then back to the elevator doors. Still, he doesn't respect boundaries. She shrugged lightly. I've handled worse. Before he could reply, the elevator jolted violently and shuddered to a halt between floors. The lights flickered once, twice, then dimmed, replaced by the soft blue glow of emergency backup. Perfect, Grant muttered, pressing the call button. A buzz, then silence. A moment later, a recorded voice informed them of a citywide outage and that assistance would arrive within the hour. Claire leaned against the mirrored wall, exhaling slowly. Well, this is familiar. He glanced at her. Last time, I was the one intruding on your space, she said. You seem to have made a habit of ending up in enclosed spaces with me. She laughed just a little. At least you're fully dressed this time? Then instantly regretted it. Sorry, she added. That was inappropriate. Grant didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped forward and stood beside her, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. You apologized too much. Claire didn't answer, but the air between them was different now. Not heavy, just full. The silence stretched comfortably for several minutes. Then Claire spoke, voice low. Why did it bother you? What? The way Lauren was flirting with me. I saw your expression. She turned her head, met his eyes. Even in the dim light, they held. Grant didn't deflect this time. You know why? Her heart picked up pace. Do I? He exhaled, long and uneven. Ever since you walked into that spa, you've been breaking down every wall I spent years building. And the most infuriating part is, you don't even seem to realize you're doing it. Claire looked at him, really looked, and something inside her softened further. I'm not trying to break anything, she said. I just see things. I know. He moved a fraction closer, the space between them narrowing into something electric. I tried to push you away, he admitted, gave you impossible tasks, was colder than necessary, looked for flaws, but you kept showing up, not just competent, not just calm, but present, unshakably present. Claire's voice was almost a whisper. And now I don't know how to keep you at a distance, and I'm not sure I want to. His hand, tentative, lifted. Fingers brushed her cheek. Featherlight. She didn't move. Grant, she said quietly, I'm not here to rescue you. I know. But maybe I can stand with you. That's all. Their eyes locked. And for a suspended breath, neither moved. Then, from deep within the building, a groan of machinery. The lights blinked back to life. The elevator lurched upward with a soft jerk. They both stepped back just slightly. Back in their separate rooms. Claire sat on the edge of her bed, the conversation replaying in her head. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew this. There was no going back to before. That night, her journal entry was brief. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. The truth hung in the air between us unspoken, but finally seen. The flight back from Paris was uneventful. They sat across the aisle from each other in the company jet, Claire with her reading glasses on, annotating documents in 3 languages, Grant with his laptop open, eyes unreadable behind a thin layer of concentration. They spoke only when necessary. A nod. A single question about a phrasing in the French contract. The briefest exchange about ground transportation once they landed. But underneath it all, there was something fragile humming in the quiet. Not avoidance, not distance. Caution. As if neither wanted to press too hard on something that had just begun to take shape. Back in New York, Claire returned to her small apartment and unpacked slowly. Her suitcase still smelled faintly of jasmine from the hotel's courtyard. She folded her blouse with unusual care, placed her notes into a drawer, and finally sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the floor for a long while. She should feel accomplished. The Paris meetings had been a success. No missteps, no missed cues. And yet, there was a weight on her chest she couldn't quite name. She thought about the way Grant had looked at her in the elevator, the hesitation, the honesty. She touched her cheek where his fingers had brushed it. It had been a quiet kind of intimacy, one that didn't need names or definitions. But now that they were back, surrounded by routine, expectations, and rules, she wondered if it would vanish like mist under sunlight. Claire closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. Do not hope for what isn't promised, she told herself. But her heart didn't listen. Grant sat alone in his corner office later that night, the city lights stretching endlessly beyond the glass. He hadn't gone home, hadn't touched his dinner. He simply sat with a half-full tumbler of scotch and an inbox that he had no interest in opening. His mind kept circling back to her, to the elevator, to the moment she had said, "I'm not here to rescue you." And the way those words had felt like both a comfort and a threat, because if she wasn't there to rescue him, then whatever he felt, it would have to be real, mutual, voluntary. That terrified him more than any merger or boardroom coup. He remembered how it felt to lose everything in an instant. Emily, Nora, the sound of shattering glass and sirens, the way the world kept turning as if nothing had happened. He had built his life on silence after that, on control, precision. Claire was different. She didn't try to fix. She simply stayed, present, unmoving, unafraid. And now, he couldn't stop thinking about her. The following week passed with an uneasy rhythm. They returned to their usual cadence emails, notes, translations, brief check-ins. But something had shifted. The silence between them was no longer neutral. It carried weight, memory, possibility. Twice, Grant passed by Claire's desk and paused as if to speak. Both times, he walked away. Once, Claire lingered by the executive suite door, folder in hand, heart knocking too loudly in her chest. But when the assistant said Grant was on a call, she turned and left. Neither knew how to bridge the almost something between them. On Friday, near closing time, Claire finally spoke first. She stood at Grant's office doorway, one hand resting on the frame. Her voice was steady, but soft. "Can I ask you something?" He looked up, surprised, but nodded. "Why do you keep pulling back?" His expression tightened, but not in anger. She continued, "It's not just me, it's everyone, but especially when someone gets close." He studied her face for a long moment before answering. "Because the last time I let someone close," he said quietly, "I lost them." Claire stepped into the room, closed the door behind her. She didn't sit, just stood there, letting the quiet do some of the work. "I'm not asking to be let in all at once," she said. "Just don't shut the door completely." He nodded once, a slow, small motion, but it was enough. For now. That night, Claire wrote, "Some things don't need to be said to be understood, and some wounds don't heal, but they do learn how to breathe again." It began with a phrase. Claire had been translating a batch of internal documents for an upcoming merger, nothing unusual. The target company, Belridge Solutions, was a mid-sized tech firm based in Austin with a decent track record and a clean public record. But one clause kept appearing across different contracts and languages: compensatory transition allowances to external proprietary partners. Harmless, at first glance. Vague, corporate. But then she saw it again in a Mandarin version of a licensing agreement. And again. In German. Hidden deep in a logistics addendum. And each time, the phrasing was slightly altered, as if someone was trying too hard to make it look unremarkable. Claire felt the familiar prickle at the base of her neck. She didn't want to jump to conclusions. She'd been in this world long enough to know that not every pattern meant something. But still, she flagged the files, cross-checked older documents, pulled records from 5 years ago, and that's when her breath caught. There it was again, in an old translation from the Boston lab merger. The same phrase. The same odd linguistic camouflage. The one tied to the day Grant's family had died. She sat back in her chair, heart pounding. Her fingers hovered over her keyboard. She wanted to believe it was coincidence, but something deep in her gut said otherwise. That evening, she waited until most of the office had cleared before walking up to Grant's floor. His assistant had already gone home. The outer hallway was dim, bathed in twilight from the glass wall. Claire knocked once, then stepped inside. Grant looked up, surprised to see her. "Everything okay? I need to speak with you," she said, closing the door behind her. She crossed the room and placed the printed documents on his desk. Her hands trembled slightly. "This is from the Bell Ridge merger paperwork. I found it repeated in 3 languages: French, Mandarin, and German. With coded variation." Grant narrowed his eyes, leaning forward, and Claire met his gaze. "It matches phrasing from 5 years ago, from the Boston acquisition. The one before the explosion." For a moment, the room went still. Grant didn't move. Then he reached for the papers, flipping through them. His face remained unreadable, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the edge of the page. "You're certain?" he asked quietly. Claire nodded. "The coding isn't accidental. Someone is embedding proprietary loopholes, hiding them through linguistic layers. Just like last time." Grant looked up at her, and for the first time, she saw something flicker behind his controlled expression: fear and rage. "They're doing it again," he said, almost to himself. "Who signed off on this?" Claire shook her head. "Belridge's CEO, Richard Mason. His name is on all of them. But I think it's deeper than that." Grant stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "I should have seen this. I should have known." "You couldn't have," Claire said. "They're counting on you being cautious, distracted, safe." He turned back to her. "But you weren't." Claire hesitated. And then she said what she hadn't let herself say yet. "I recognized it because I've seen it before. Years ago, when I worked in Geneva, I helped translate a portfolio of Eastern European merger documents. The same code appeared there once." Grant stared at her. "Why didn't you say anything before?" "Because I thought it was buried," she said. "And because I didn't know who to trust." The air between them shifted again. Grant walked slowly back to his desk, placing both palms flat against it. "They're trying to get inside again," he murmured, "but not through fire this time, through language." Claire stepped closer. "But we can stop them." He looked up, and this time, his eyes weren't distant. They were focused, sharpened, alive. He reached for her hand without thinking, held it, firm and warm. For the first time in 5 years, he said, "I don't feel alone." That night, Claire couldn't sleep, not because of fear, but because of the weight of what they were standing in front of. She knew what was coming. This wouldn't be clean or simple. They would make enemies. They would face pressure. But she also knew something else. If they faced it together, they might just make it through. In her journal, she wrote, "Sometimes the past doesn't stay buried. Sometimes it finds you in the smallest phrase, waiting to be seen. And when it does, you either run or you rise." The boardroom on the 40th floor had no windows, just recessed lighting, a sleek black conference table, and chairs upholstered in leather, so smooth they hardly whispered when moved. It was designed for power, precision, control. Today, it would become a battlefield. Claire sat to Grant's right, a neat stack of annotated documents in front of her. Her fingers were steady, though her heart beat a fraction faster than usual. Across the table, Richard Mason leaned back, hands folded, a confident smirk on his face. "We're thrilled about the partnership," Mason was saying to the assembled executives. "Belridge brings fresh energy, and your global infrastructure gives us a stronger market reach. Win-win." He gestured grandly. Too grandly. Claire watched the way he avoided eye contact for more than a second, the way his smile never touched his eyes. She'd seen this kind of arrogance before in diplomats who lied with charm, in boardroom vultures who wore trust like a tailored suit. And she was done being polite. Grant cleared his throat. "Before we proceed with the final signatures, Ms. Whitmore has a few observations to share." All eyes turned to Claire. She stood, calmly. Her voice, when it came, was clear, precise, unshakably firm. "Over the past 2 weeks, I've translated Belridge's merger documents into French, Mandarin, and German," she began. "In doing so, I encountered repeated phrasing-coded terminology disguised through linguistic nuance." She opened the first folder. "These phrases mimic structures used in a prior acquisition 5 years ago, phrases later linked to fraudulent clauses and proprietary theft." A rustle moved through the room. Mason's smirk faltered. "I've highlighted 6 examples," Claire continued, passing copies to each board member. "Each uses regional idioms to disguise financial diversions, compensatory transition allowances, external proprietary repositioning, and others." She turned to Mason. "Do you deny including these?" Mason gave a short, dismissive laugh. "That's a stretch. Standard language. Nothing irregular." Claire looked at him, eyes unwavering. "Except that your standard phrases match word for word with the language used in the sabotage documents from the Hartwell and Pierce Boston acquisition, the same ones linked to the explosion that killed Emily and Nora Hartwell." Gasps. A chair scraped backward. Grant remained silent, watching, coiled. Claire leaned forward slightly. "You were involved then, Mr. Mason?" "Not directly. Perhaps. But your signature appeared on secondary approvals. Now, 5 years later, you're here again with identical structures buried in 3 languages. That's not coincidence. That's a pattern." Mason stood. "You have no proof? Just a few carefully chosen words." Grant finally spoke. His voice was like cold iron. "Actually, we have full translations, cross-referenced and time-stamped, along with metadata showing edit trails originating from your personal network." He slid a second folder across the table. "IT verified it this morning." Mason's face went pale. "And before you try to walk out," Grant added, gesturing toward the back of the room, "I'd like to introduce Agent Lee from the SEC. She's been listening for the past 20 minutes." The door opened. A woman in a gray suit stepped inside. "I believe we have enough to begin an official inquiry," she said. Mason looked around at the stairs, the silence, the sudden absence of control. He didn't speak again. Security escorted him out. The room slowly emptied, murmurs trailing behind each executive. Claire remained seated, still processing the adrenaline coursing through her. Grant sat beside her, his posture still tense. After a long moment, he turned to her. "You saved us." Claire shook her head. "I did my job." "No," he said, Softer now? You did more than that? You saw what no one else wanted to see? And you didn't flinch? She met his eyes. Neither did you. There was a pause thick with relief, with respect, and something else neither dared name. Not yet. Back in her office, hours later, Claire sat at her desk as the city went dark outside. She stared at the folder Grant had left her, a simple "thank you" scrawled in his handwriting across the top. She didn't need flowers or speeches, just this, the quiet acknowledgement, the trust. In her journal that night, truth doesn't always come like thunder. Sometimes it arrives in the steady voice of someone who refuses to look away. And when it does, it changes everything. The office was still. Night had settled in layers of quiet shadow across the windows, and the usual hum of the building had faded to something almost intimate. Only a handful of lights remained on, mostly from cleaning crews, and the distant glow of a vending machine down the hall. Claire was still in her chair, sorting the last of the documents from the fallout of the Belridge meeting. She wasn't tired. Not really. Just full of everything. A soft knock. She turned. Grant stood at the door, hands in the pockets of his coat. He looked different, less composed. Not unkempt, but looser somehow, as if the day had peeled something tight away from him. "Am I interrupting?" he asked. "No," she said, standing. "Come in." He stepped inside, closed the door behind him with a quiet click. They stood in silence for a moment, the distance between them charged, but no longer tense. "You didn't have to stay late," he said. "You didn't have to come find me." He gave a half smile, then let it drop. "I wasn't sure I'd know what to say." "You don't have to say much," she replied. "You already did back there." Grant exhaled, moved a little closer. His eyes searched hers, not with calculation, but with a kind of cautious hope. "You once told me you weren't here to rescue me," he said. Claire nodded. "But tonight?" He paused. "You didn't just protect the company. You protected what I've spent 5 years trying to rebuild. Quietly, carefully, alone." His voice dipped, softer. "You didn't tear anything down. You just stood beside it until it opened." She stepped toward him, slowly. "I didn't do it to be heroic, Grant. I did it because it mattered. Because you mattered." The words hung between them. Then, gently, almost hesitantly, he reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I used to think if I let anyone in again, I'd lose everything all over." She looked at him. "And now I'm realizing that shutting everyone out is just a slower way of losing." He lowered his hand, but Claire caught it before it fell. Her fingers wrapped around his. Not possession, just connection. They didn't kiss. They didn't need to. Instead, they stood there, hands joined, eyes open. No more walls. No more masks. Just truth, breathing between them like something sacred. Later that night, as Claire walked home through the crisp air, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Not excitement, not triumph, but peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because for the first time nothing was hidden. In her journal, she wrote, "There are doors we lock so tightly, we forget they're even there. But sometimes, someone comes along not to break them open, but to remind us they still open at all." Spring came late that year. March arrived with cold rain and half-hearted sunlight. But in the lobby of Hartwell and Pierce, a single vase of white tulips had appeared on the reception desk, a quiet rebellion against the gray outside. Claire noticed them as she stepped through the revolving doors one morning, coffee in hand, scarf tucked around her neck. She smiled at the sight, though she had no idea who had placed them there. Maybe someone, like her, had grown tired of winter. Things had shifted, but gently. Claire and Grant hadn't announced anything. There were no rumors, no whispers in hallways. Their working relationship remained professional, efficient. But the air between them had softened. It was in the way they looked at each other during meetings, in the quiet pauses that carried more weight than most conversations, in the way he smiled, actually smiled, when she passed him a folder. Claire had come to understand something. In those weeks after the confrontation with Mason, love didn't always arrive with grand declarations. Sometimes it slipped into a room like morning light, through cracked blinds, subtle, slow, but steady. One afternoon, after a long meeting with international clients, Grant stopped by her office. She was alone, still jotting down a few notes. "You still work too late," he said, leaning on the doorframe. "You still count my hours." He stepped inside. This time, he wasn't wearing the CEO's armor, just a light jacket and that quiet, thoughtful expression she'd grown to recognize. "I have something for you," he said. She raised an eyebrow. He handed her a small box. Inside was a fountain pen, old, polished wood, silver trim. She turned it over gently in her hands. "This was Emily's," he said. "She used it for everything: grocery lists, birthday cards. I found it recently. Thought about putting it away again. But," he looked at her, "I'd rather it be used than kept in a drawer." Claire blinked against the sudden sting in her eyes. She placed the pen carefully on her desk. "Thank you," she said softly. "I'll take care of it." "I know." That evening, they walked out of the building together. The air was damp, but warmer than it had been in weeks. Trees along the sidewalk had begun to bud just barely. "Do you still write in that journal of yours?" Grant asked as they waited for the crosswalk light. "Every night? Even about this?" Claire smiled. "Especially about this." He looked over at her. "What do you write?" She hesitated, then said that sometimes life doesn't give us back what we lost, but it gives us something else, not to replace it, but to remind us we're still capable of feeling. They reached the other side of the street, and then, without hesitation, Grant reached for her hand. No grand moment, no dramatic kiss under city lights, just the quiet, human act of choosing someone. And this time, Claire didn't hesitate. She held on. In her journal that night, she wrote, "I used to think healing was a destination, but maybe it's just this a moment where pain no longer leads the way, where trust returns not in full, but in pieces. And that's enough. That's more than enough." Sometimes, healing doesn't come with dramatic breakthroughs or loud declarations. It comes quietly through steady presence, honest eyes, and the courage to stay when it's easier to walk away. This story reminds us that pain doesn't disappear when we build walls around it. It only becomes heavier. But when someone dares to see us beyond our defenses, not to fix us, but simply to understand, that's when real healing begins. In a world that often values strength as silence, Claire shows us that true strength can be gentle, It listens, it waits, and it doesn't run from someone else's brokenness. And Grant's journey reminds us that trusting again is not weakness. It's one of the bravest things we can do after loss. So if you've ever been hurt and found it hard to let anyone close again, let this be a quiet invitation. You don't have to do it all at once. But maybe, just maybe, you can leave the door unlocked, because sometimes letting someone stand beside you is the first step toward feeling whole again. Thank you for spending your time with us, for listening, not just with your ears, but with your heart. If this story touched you in any way, we invite you to share it with someone who might need it too. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Shining Stories. Your support helps us bring more heartfelt stories to light, stories that heal, connect, and remind us we're not alone. Until next time, take gentle care